Ryazan, and last week, on weekends, on the night of March 3rd, I was returning home from Podolsk by car. I went there for my cousin's birthday. He turned 14. We sat in a family circle. It so happened that stay overnight as planned did not work. I needed to go to Ryazan. Due to circumstances, I had to leave at 11 p.m., so I drove in the night. So I was driving. Eyes began to close slowly. I switched the radio wave, found something peppy. I put some caramel candies into my mouth. It was 12:45 on the clocks. It was surprisingly empty on the road. Sometimes car drove by. I was driving through the village. I looked on the side of the road and I saw a female silhouette. She was swaying a little. She was walking, facing the direction of travel, with the back to me. I slowed down, drove past. I wanted to leave because I don't let strangers into my car. I have such a principle. But at that moment I thought, you never know what a situation is, especially woman. And on the way there would be someone to talk with, to distract from sleep. I overlooked her and stopped, 10 meters from her, maybe less. Stopped and looked in the rear view mirror. It seemed a little strange how she was dressed. She was wrapped in some kind of scarf or something. I didn't attach much importance. Now fashion is such that you no longer have to be surprised. But that's not the point. As soon as I stopped, I started at her in the mirror. I saw that she also stopped. Well, unsurprising, I thought. Such a time, a car stop. It would be not normal if she wasn't scared. I decided that I had to do something to show her that I wasn't afraid. I opened the car's door and went out on the road, more precisely on the roadside. After taking a couple of steps, I said loudly, I don't remember what exactly, some kinda, lady, do you need a ride? Is everything okay? I squinted a little, trying to see her face, but as before, she just stood without moving. And I thought that she was probably drunk. And at that moment we were standing face to face, silently. I wanted to approach her, but at that moment there was a slight sense of anxiety. Until this moment, I thought of this situation as extremely fascinating, as an adventure, but now I started to evaluate the situation a little differently. Do I even need this? Maybe some kind of addict? What if she pounced on me? So I opened the door and got in. And before I left I said again, I'm leaving, are you sure you don't need help? The silhouette barely perceptible swayed and began to move in my direction. It seemed like she was finally changed her mind and decided to become a part of my company all along the way. But actually, at this very moment, I felt wildly creepy. The woman was already confidently getting closer to my auto. Her face was hidden by the shadow of a scarf and a hood. And at that moment, in the lights of rear lights, I saw her arms, more precisely hands, that were peeking out from under the fabric. At first I didn't have time to get scared. Information was processed in my head. The skin of the hands was blue and pale, with terrible, deep ion cells that were clearly visible, and the nails were brown and dirty. Arms were long and crooked. The wild horror seized, as suddenly as the desire to get into the car and put the pedal to the metal. And I did. I had a lump in my throat. I thought that my heart would come out. Reflexively I closed the door and pressed on the door lock button. The wild fear didn't even let me to turn my head to the left, to that window, behind which there was already a reason for my panic. The hands and legs trembled, and the first attempt was unsuccessful. The car stalled. All of a sudden, there was a sound on my left. At that moment, time stopped. For some reason, I didn't try to frantically turn the key. I slowly turned my head and looked right at what was standing at my car. What I initially mistook for a girl was not her at all. Rather, it was a man. Although this statement is also quite controversial. From under the old rocks, two black eyes looked right at me. There was nothing but the darkness. Hairless skin on the head, as on the hands, was with a blue tint and covered with ulcers and deep cracks. The nose was two holes. At that moment, the creature, I couldn't name it in another way, parted its lips, revealing thin, several raw teeth. Why did this happen with me? Why did I stop? And I slowly took the key with my right hand and turned it. The car started up, and suddenly there was a knocking again, on my left. Every hit carried a wave of goosebumps across my body. I turned the key confidently, switched the gear, put the pedal to the metal. 10 seconds later, the speedometer needle exceeded 100 kilometers an hour. Finally, I left at least some safety. As it later turned out, not for a long time. I took my eyes off the road and looked in a rear mirror. There was no one in this place. In shock, I thought that maybe I drove too far. The roar of the engine distracted me a little, and I noticed that I laid the speedometer needle but forgot to switch overdrive. And at that moment, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed a black cold look that was looking at me on the right side, where the road side was. I looked at the dashboard one more time. It's impossible. I was driving at the speed of 150 kilometers an hour, and the creature was running rear, staring at me. At that moment, tears came to my eyes. Out loud, I begged my car to drive faster, and in my head I imagined the most unpleasant scenarios for the development of this situation. It seemed to me that the creature would burst into my car with one and tear me apart. I accelerated faster and faster. I didn't have the courage to look at the right and meet with his eyes again. I drove like an idiot. There was a storm of crazy emotions in my head. Shock, horror. I don't know how long I drove like that, but I looked at the pursuer. I didn't even know whether it was near. Maybe it was far from me a long time ago, but finally I was driving among buildings, saw parked cars. At that moment several cars drove past me. It was like I came to my senses, slowed down a little, looked around. Without seeing the reason for my shock, I began to calm down in many ways. I tried to convince myself that there was a logical explanation for all this, although I couldn't make such an explanation. Honestly, I just wanted to wake up and discover that it was a dream, even though I felt safe and the road became more livelier and I was driving past the police post. Feeling of anxiety still didn't leave my head. In general, I reached Ryazan, drove to my house. I parked my car, but before I got off, I carefully looked around again. The neighbor stood at the front door of the house. It gave me confidence. I got off the car and reached the door with quick steps. Greeted. The neighbor said, "Dim, you look like you've seen a ghost." I quickly climbed to my 5th floor and locked the door. I was alone at home. I called my friends and said that I got home. I spent some time on the internet trying to find similar situations, but after reading a couple of people's stories, it only got worse. I needed to go to bed. I shut down the laptop, lay under a blanket. It was 2:30 on the clocks, but the sound of the alarm key ring interrupted my sleep. The keychain was beeping, and the icon on the display was on, hit on the windshield. It happens sometimes, without a driven reason. Maybe a cat, maybe a plane flew too low to the ground. I live near the airport. I went to the window and looked at my car. What happened next is easy to guess. I dropped the keys from my hands. The creature was standing near my car and staring right at my window with its black eyes. It was looking right at me. It just can't be real, I thought. I ran to another room, took a camera, returned to the window. It was standing and looking at me and licking his lips with its black tongue. I pointed the lens and took a photo. When I made sure that the photo was good, I looked out the window again. There was no one. I didn't know what to do. No one would believe in such a story. I would be mistaken for a psycho. It's good that I managed to take the picture. I went to the bathroom to wash my face, and at that moment I heard a slow scratching on the front door. I paled. Everything was like in a fog. As I got closer, I heard a knock. I did not go to bed that night. Didn't have courage to look into the peephole. The day is March 7. I didn't leave house for a single second. Every night I look out the window and see it. It will get me anyway. It's only a matter of time.